The optimism for investors, of course, is the fact that we have vaccines to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been a lot of drama around AstraZeneca's vaccine in recent days, including now concerns that perhaps some of the latest data we had on the efficacy was a bit outdated. Here to help us sort through it all is Jason Kolbert. He's Director of Research at Dawson James Securities. And let's start there. The AstraZeneca story, I feel like it changes on me on a daily basis. As you read it, what should our concerns be and what is actually going on there with AstraZeneca?
Well, remember that 15 million people in the UK have already received this vaccine. Yes, there were some reports of adverse events, blood clots. It turns out that they're not necessarily tied to the vaccine, and clearly the benefits outweigh the risks. Remember, too, that the AstraZeneca vaccine is very similar to the J&J vaccine. The compounding the noise level, though, is the fact that at the U.S. FDA, there was recently a review, and the question was, have they included the absolute latest data? And they had not. So obviously the data is evolving, but I would say to you that my confidence level that you will see U.S. approval of the AstraZeneca vaccine is very, very high. I do think it's a safe vaccine, and I do think the benefits outweigh the risks. But I also believe that there's another question here that we're not asking, and that is, in medicine, does one size fit all? We've never really tried to vaccinate a population during a pandemic, so we don't really know exactly what effects this has. For example, if you've had COVID or you actively have COVID and you get the vaccine, it's likely that you might experience more side effects, more adverse events. So rather than just vaccinating everybody, it would suggest that in a calmer, slower environment, we might immunologically profile patients before we give them the vaccine.
Okay, break that down a little bit for me then about how that would actually work. Because right now, obviously, the thrust is on this side of the border too, to just try to get the jab, as they call it, into as many arms as possible. But you're talking about a bit more of a thoughtful approach, I guess.
That's right. So, we're clearly focused on when we're going to achieve herd immunity. When can we get to that magic 80 to 90% level, which will be a combination of vaccinated people and people who've had COVID who have a natural immunity. And the push is to get there. And, let's not worry about how we get there. But if you pull back a little bit, there are a select group of patients that probably should not get this vaccine. And that's almost an afterthought. And I clearly don't want to position myself as an anti-vaxxer. The benefits outweigh the risks. But it's very clear that as COVID evolves and as our understanding of COVID evolves, you may see diagnostics and immunological diagnostics play a more heavily weighted role in determining who gets what vaccines when. There are questions. If you get a COVID vaccine this year, how long will you be protected for? So I think as those questions which are not being asked get asked, we're going to see another layer of the COVID onion get unpeeled. And I have some ideas there on things that we should be looking at.
Okay, let's take a look at a few of those names, because we always talk about the big ones, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and the headlines, but you have a few other names. I'm going to start with ProPhase Labs.
Yeah, a really interesting small company in the U.S. Love the CEO. He's very dedicated to the company. And basically, he's turning around tests very, very rapidly. And he has helped me to understand, how many times have you been tested? My son, who's at the University of Wisconsin, gets tested every week. There are many people that are going to be tested many, many times. So when you think about the reopening of schools, testing will be critical. And so this is a pure play company just based on the increase in COVID testing, and it's highly leveraged to that versus, say, the traditional diagnostics company where COVID represents a small portion of their business. And the sister company to that is Aditax, ticker symbol ADTX. Aditax is the next evolution of immunological testing. So if you've had a COVID vaccine 6 months later, are you still immune to COVID? The Aditex immune score will tell you your immunological profile and if you still have immunity. And I think these types of diagnostics are going to play a much more prominent role going forward. And then, of course, there are the vaccine makers. A really interesting company that no one is talking about is Dyadic, ticker symbol DYAI. Dyadic makes the manufacturing process even more efficient. What's interesting is South Korea just signed a partnership with Dyadic to use their manufacturing platform. So as we look at the evolution of COVID, cost almost doesn't matter at this point. But a year from now, being a low-cost provider is going to be critical. So I think Dyadic is a really interesting name to look at the space as well.
All right, some areas that people haven't been looking at. I believe one more on your list was Sorrento.
Yeah, I remember when President Trump got the Regeneron cocktail, and I was thinking, wow, that's really interesting because Lilly and Sorrento are next in line. They have a really interesting mixture of monoclonal antibodies that essentially bind to the virus and prevent it from replicating. So Sorrento has excellent therapeutics that can treat people who have COVID and prevent them from dying. And so it's not just flattening the curve and preventing the transmission of COVID, but being able to reduce the mortality associated with the virus. And I think a name like Sorrento, SRNE, is ideally positioned. And additionally, they also have a diagnostic. So I see this as a really neat company that is also leveraged to the COVID opportunity, if you will.